Hello, I'm Mark Tucker,
And I'm Alan Furstenberg, and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Hey, welcome back, Alan.
Welcome back, Mark. Always good to see you. Always good to get this chance to catch up.
Yeah, my day is better when I talk to you.
As is mine. It's always really good to just kind of touch base with someone, even when we're kind of feeling lousy, just to touch base with a friend and say hi and
Yeah,
ask
just
how
check
you're
in.
doing. And yeah, just check in. Always good.
Well, good. So this is my idea for our topic today.
Okay.
And it's going to be, what is a day in the life for us as a developer? Because I know they're not all the same. And so we can kind of do like a juxtaposition of some of the things that we get involved with. We'll talk about a high level. We're not going to out any of our customers
No.
or anything.
This will be interesting. I'm really interested in hearing kind of what your day sounds like and how it contrasts with mine, because from our experiences, our development tasks have been similar in some ways and very different in others. So this will be fun. I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, so I guess context, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, which is Mountain Standard Time, which means that most of the year, it's actually because most of the year we're on daylight savings time.
Well, most of the year we're on daylight savings time. You're not.
And we're not. Yeah, so Arizona's not. So for most of the year, we're California time. This is how I look at it. And the rest of the year, I'm, Utah time. Because like Utah and Arizona are like right one above the other on the map. So, and I've got family in Utah. That's where I'm originally from. And we have an office. Rain has an office in Utah. So some of our developers work out of Utah. We've got one in Seattle. And then we've got, kind of the majority is more on the East Coast. So sometimes I'm 2 hours behind New York, and sometimes I'm 3 hours behind.
And I guess also for some context, how big is Rain? So how big is your employer? How many people do you normally have to deal with in your company and outside of your company on a daily basis?
Wow. Exact number? I don't know.
We're not looking for exact numbers.
Normally the projects that I work on are probably 3 to 4 people. As far as Rain employees go, we've got a business dev person, we've got a voice user interface conversational designer role, and then a dev role. Sometimes we've got multiple devs that work on a project, sometimes not, depending on where things are. And then there are different people on the strategy side that I get pulled into. My role here at Rain, I do technical direction stuff too, and then like pulling in with our clients and stuff. So probably on any given day I'm interfacing with like 20 different people.
Okay, so again, to contrast, I'm on the East Coast, so I work out of New York. I would say the bulk of my regular clients these days are in New York. So once upon a time, I actually would go into the city once or twice a year to see them. Nowadays I don't. And even so, I didn't see them in person very frequently. But I also have clients that are kind of scattered around. So I've got some clients who are in Central Time and work in Central Time, and some clients who are in Mountain Time and work in Mountain Time. But also a lot of my clients are also, it's not unusual that they work outside of those hours.
Yeah.
So it's not just me as a developer who works weird hours sometimes. My clients also work weird hours sometimes. And, so it's not out of the question that I'll get a message from somebody at 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. or 6 a.m. or 5 a.m.
Wow.
And I've gotten emergency calls at midnight in the past. Fortunately, not too many of those. But, so my clients tend to focus on East Coast, but really can be kind of all over the place sometimes. My company is also a lot smaller. There's really just a few people. I work for a small company, which I like. It also means I've got, direct access to the person in charge of the company. My boss also owns and runs the company, which is,
Yeah.
And I've known my boss for literal decades, which is always nice. And he also gives me a lot of freedom to work directly with the clients. So my clients are largely, by and large, my clients. They all have my work email address. I have their, and we will talk directly. I don't have any interference in between.
Okay.
And I do a lot of stuff for them. So I do troubleshooting. On operational systems, I do their troubleshooting. I answer their questions. So I'm a help desk. As new projects are being developed, they're talking to me about the new projects. For graphic design stuff, I'm not on my own, fortunately, as anybody who's seen my graphic design will know. We do have a graphic designer that I will work with, but once things are going, that's all kind of in my ballpark. It's all up to me to make sure the graphic design keeps working, and as new features come in, make sure they fit in okay. And so I've got a fantastic graphic designer that I can work with, and I do work with. But for day-to-day stuff, I largely work by myself.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I definitely work on teams. So I've got regular like teams, status meetings or stand-ups for those projects that are doing agile. And so there's definitely other people on a team that I interface with on a regular basis, or, on a daily basis for sure.
Yep.
On different things. So that's interesting. Something else about the time. So kind of the time range that I work, I typically do a 9 to 5, but I do like the flexibility in the schedule. If there's something I need to go do, I can go run out and do an errand or something in the middle of the day when I needed to get that done, and then I just work into the evening. There's a lot of flexibility.
Yep.
On that.
Let me just say same here. So my boss, pretty much within the work period, it's kind of expected that I'll be around, because that's, again, when my clients are usually around. But also, if for whatever reason I've got to do stuff that goes into the evening or do stuff on weekends, there's that flexibility. So if I need to do something in the middle of the day, it's usually not a problem. I just need to make sure I coordinate with my boss, because we're a small shop, that somebody will be there to answer email if necessary. How long have you done remote work?
Oh, I have done remote work probably for 5 years. I'd have to go back and think, but yeah, the job, this job's remote. The job that I had before was remote. The one that I had before was going to the office a couple of days, work remote the rest of the time. So a lot of remote experience.
I've been doing remote work for over 20 years at this point, I think.
So you were you were doing remote before remote was cool.
Right. So, seeing people who have been kind of thrust into remote now, and are, it's a very, very different thing. Remote work, when you carefully design it and carefully plan for it, and how to structure the job around it, can work really well. When you're kind of thrust into it and you're not used to it, it can be rough.
Yeah. So I could go into an office figuratively in Arizona, but I would be the only person in the office. There are no other Arizona employees.
I think I do have coworkers that actually do have a separate office from their home office.
Mm-hmm.
They're the only ones. I mean, it's an office for them, and it's specifically so that if they have a space outside of their house, just to be away from their house, which can be really useful.
Yeah, and I know that people on the East Coast are doing WeWork. So if they don't want to necessarily work remote, that they can go in, and they've been meeting together at a WeWork location or something to coordinate on things and stuff like that. So, but so I typically work, core hours, like I said, and most of my meetings are there. Sometimes my meetings are kind of more heavily towards the morning side of the day because of the time difference, and we want to.
That's your morning things. Or their morning?
My morning.
Okay.
Which would be 2 or 3 hours later on their side of things. And there have been times where I've had earlier, meetings earlier than 9, and some cases as early as 7 a.m. when we've been working with a client in Europe. So but not too bad. It makes sense.
Most folks when I set up meetings are very flexible, like to try to concentrate around times that work in all time zones, which is nice. Yeah. I think people are finally getting used to the notion that they've got to deal with time zones when scheduling things, or at least asking, what time zone are you in, or what hours do you work?
Yeah, I always find myself like when I'm confirming a meeting, like just back and forth through some sort of a chat, then I always like do my time zone and theirs as well, just to make sure this, which is this time, your time, just making sure we're all on the same page.
Yep, definitely.
But so I don't know, like, see, typical day for me. So I could have anywhere from a light schedule of meetings for like 2 meetings a day, which could be just some small status update meetings, or some bigger ones with clients where in some cases there's 20 people on the call that are mostly the clients that you're working on. So I could probably go from anywhere from 2 to 6 meetings a day. So some days are very meeting heavy. Some days of the week have a lot more meetings than the rest, but some days are fairly light, and I do try to block off certain times, especially if I start to see that like more and more things are encroaching in. I'm like, okay, I've got something I need to work on. So I start like to carve out, 2 or 3 hour chunks of time to make sure that I've got the time I can dedicate towards projects.
Yeah. For the most part, I actually have fairly few meetings. Most of my clients I have a good enough rapport with that we can deal with stuff by email. Mm-hmm. And we tend to do that a lot, and it tends to be very effective most of the time. And I think when we start noticing that it starts becoming less effective, when we're clearly missing each other on communications, we'll say, can we just schedule 15 minutes for a meeting? Right. And we'll schedule a 15-minute meeting, and we'll go in and we'll clearly, make clear what we're talking about. Everyone get on the same page, and then we're back to email again.
Right.
So, those brief meetings really can help. And they're great because everyone leaves saying, just 15 minutes. We're back on track. Everyone's happy. And it only took 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is, a huge win.
Yeah. So we do quite a bit through email and Slack, as much as we can. But then there are definitely times where clients want to meet with us, or times when we're coordinated amongst three people, and it's just kind of easier to quicker to do a 15-minute status update meeting.
Yeah, we do a lot of work with Slack as well. And that's actually, I'd say it's recent, but I guess it's been a few years now. We used to use a homebrewed chat system before we went on to Slack. So again, having that I won't say constant communication, but that constant availability has been useful for us. Even just to the point where, I can say, I'm going to be away from the keyboard for half an hour. Ping me if you need me, but don't ping me. Just being able to say that easily in a chat, really can be helpful.
Yeah. So, do you use a specific video communication software?
For us, it's mostly whatever the client is most comfortable with using. So,
which is going to be a lot of different ones.
Yeah. These days it tends to mostly be either Zoom or Google Meet, although there's still a few clients that like WebEx, a couple of clients that like Microsoft Teams. But it's whatever the client likes the most.
Yeah.
For us, we actually very rarely use video chatting ourselves. Before video chatting was popular, we used to do audio chats. And even then, we tended not to really like them or do them all that often. There will still be occasions where I'll send my boss a message and say, can you and I just get on the phone for 15 minutes so we can make sure we're on the same page? And we'll do so. But again, it's brief.
Yeah. Yeah. So we use most of those, adding in Chime whenever we're talking with Amazon. Then we're
okay. That makes sense.
So we're using Chime. So.
Yes. Yeah. The few times I've had to be on the line with Amazon, I've had to use Chime as well.
So let's see. Other things I do. So I've got some projects that I'm primarily responsible for delivering. Got a big project that worked most of last year on that's getting close to the finish stage on.
So, let's actually kind of think about that for a moment. You're working on a project on a normal day as you work on that project.
Mm-hmm.
How much time are you actually spending coding?
So it could be, if it's a heavy, meeting day, then I might only be able to have a couple of hours, but on some of the lighter days, I tend to work more. So it could be 6 to 8 hours of coding that I could do on a day. So there are definitely days where I can get right into it and make a lot of progress on things. And there's sometimes I'm juggling a couple projects at a time, and I kind of have to time slice. And it usually works better if I say, this day I'm working just on this project, and this day I'm working just on this project when I'm coding, as opposed to trying to do, both of it on the same day.
That tends to be my behavior as well. Or, if I do need to make progress on more than one project at once, I will dedicate my morning to this project and my afternoon to this other one, or something along those lines. But again, pretty much the same. When I'm coding, I like to make sure I'm coding for at least 4 hours. Less than that, I tend not to get as many good results. But sometimes, if I know I've only got a couple of hours, I might work on a project that does not require the same amount of focus necessary for me.
Yeah.
Either something where I'm doing more scripting rather than detailed coding, or fixing a problem that I already kind of know how to fix, and it doesn't require a lot of investigation for me.
Yeah, and sometimes if it turns out that I don't have a lot of time towards the end of the day to have worked on something, and I know I'm going to work on it more the next day, I try to figure out a few things, even if it's just like pulling down the latest code base, kind of the little tasks that you can kind of get out of the way so that you can just get right into it the next day as soon as you can start.
Yeah, making sure everything is up to date, even just as much as, you're pretty sure which file you're going to be working on tomorrow, loading that into the editor, going through it, saying, this does look like the right file.
Or sometimes I'll even add like a couple of to-do comments, like, right here, just kind of notes to like, this is where you're thinking, this is what you want to get. So at least I get something going, which just makes that hurdle a little bit lower so I can get into it the next day.
Definitely. Now, so besides meetings and coding, what do you do?
So we're a lot of times we're pitching ideas, or people are coming to us with projects that they want to work on, and we need to try to figure out what the feasibility of it is. So I could be looking at an API that I've never seen before, trying to understand it. Maybe even doing a proof of concept, running through some API calls if they've given us access to some keys and things to try to understand how it works, trying to figure out like which API calls we're going to need to make, how many different API calls we're going to need to make for different things, just trying to understand what the, get as much technical information that we can done. So like, today I was doing some research. We have some different options on how we want to approach a project. So I was doing research on different ways that we could approach it. Some of them were like, here's this idea, that's probably not a really good idea, but here's the idea, or this one's not going to work because of this reason, or here's a couple of ones that might be, good starting points. So, it could be before we're making like a formal pitch, or, part of the, or it could be after we've got the project, or at the phase we're trying to figure out how much it's going to cost, and if it's going to make sense to us.
I was going to say that's one of the big things that I know I do is as we're writing our proposal, when a client comes to us and says, here's what we want to do. Very frequently as part of the proposal, I'll be out there saying, well, without writing the code itself, trying to estimate how long it's going to take me, and saying, this part uses an API I've never used before. And, I've now played with it for 15 minutes and it seems like it'll be easy. Or I've played with it 15 minutes and there are going to be complications. I don't know what the complications are going to be, but I can reasonably guess there'll be complications. And that's the sort of thing, I guess, as senior developers, we're more familiar with. That's something that a junior developer, let's put it this way, 20 years ago, that was not something that was really easy for me to do. I would look at the high level proposal and need to come up with the detailed technical proposal and say, well, I don't know, that could take me 4 hours or it could take me 40 hours. I don't know. I'm a little better now, a little better.
It could take me 4 hours or 30 hours. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? You're like, this is my best guess.
Right.
If nothing, if everything goes right, or you're trying to confidence level something that you're trying to.
Right. One of the big things that I sometimes will do a lot of is identify what the risks are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of technology risks sometimes where you say this technology is moving fast. By the time we start this project, it may have changed.
Yeah.
Or, this is an API that we're not familiar with, or this is an API we need to invent. So identifying those technology risks are important.
Yeah.
When coming up with proposals.
And there's work that the conversation team's doing as far as what they think the conversation should look like. And I'm trying to validate that different points where they're showing information, that's going to be as part of the conversation. Back and forth, if the API supports those, because in some cases you might say, oh, I'm going to make this call and give me a list of something, and it might have all the information that you need, or you might need to take one of those items that you get back and make 2 additional API calls to get all, it depends on how the REST APIs were written.
Right. And then, certainly when it comes to conversational design, it starts coming into, well, can we do that in 5 or 7 seconds?
Yeah, exactly.
And if not, what do we do?
Yeah. So then we're like, do we, pull our little bag of tricks out and say, what can we do to tweak the conversation flow to accommodate that? Or what can we do as far as caching of information? Or is there something else that we can do? Is that something that we can go back to the owner of the API and say, hey, we would like an endpoint that has this additional information? What would that look like on your roadmap compared to the roadmap of this project?
And I think that's actually something that is an interesting element of what we need to do as developers on a day-to-day basis sometimes, is talk with other parties, whether they are, the first party, the client and their APIs, or somebody else that the client is working with, and discuss, well, what does this API need to look like? What is the data that I have to send you? What's the data you have to send me? How do we get all of these pieces working together?
We had a project at one point where the project was between us and this customer, but that customer was using another API that would store their data. But then that used a different authentication provider, and we were working with a partner to use, to kind of develop in a tool that they had created. So it was just like, whoa, that's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things to take into consideration. So
a lot of what I have to do sometimes is deal with other data vendors who have legacy systems.
Yeah.
So and deal with several of them. So I need to say, okay, exactly what is the data format? Exactly what is it? What am I getting? How do I know that it's good? Here are my requirements. Here's what you're sending me. Is there a gap? And if there is a gap, how do we fill that gap?
Yeah.
Is that the data provider that needs to fill the gap? Is that me needing to come up with data out of thin air? How do we address this?
Yeah, and sometimes you have to work with other teams, like if they're responsible for an API, because they're a different team in the company that you're working for. You have to come up with. I find myself crafting emails of lots of different technical questions to try to, and it's trying to figure out what are the questions that we really need to ask to help us get to the information that we need. So like one of the points was like, okay, we don't have access to the real API in our development, and we don't really know how it's been deployed. So we don't know the timings on things. And it wasn't originally made for voice, it was made for mobile. And so we hit this point where I'm like, all right, how many records typically come back from this API call? It was like a list of historic something or others, right? And like, so does it cap it, give you at 100? Does it give you all of them? Is there any paging that goes along with it? How long does it take to come back? And they're like, well, it could take up to 30 seconds to come back. And I'm like, and there wasn't any way to control. And so we ended up having to drop that part of it from this first, iteration of it, because there's really nothing that we can do about a 30-second response time in an API.
So that actually, something you said also reminds me. So beyond technical development and coding and, part of the proposals, one of the things I know I do a lot of, it actually probably takes up most of my time these days, is handling operations. And whether that's making sure things are ready for deployment, or handling alerts when I get alerts that say the machine is running too slow, or handling client questions when our clients are saying, we're getting this error that says gateway timed out. What does that mean? Okay, why is the gateway time? So dealing with those operational questions actually tend to be a lot of what I do.
Yeah.
And again, it's a small company. We don't have a separate operations staff. I'm the operations staff for my clients.
Yeah.
But it really has given me a good perspective, a good understanding of what it feels like when using the system, because when they experience pain, I get the phone call or the email, and I need to go in and see, well, is this happening because we've got a memory constraint or a CPU constraint, or just that for whatever reason, the database didn't have an index on a field that we needed, or we need to restructure exactly how we do this because it doesn't make any sense, or is it just that the machine is being pounded by bots and I need to put in a block to block another bot? All of these are possible, and I need to figure out on what level it needs to be addressed. Is it addressed on a system level? Is it addressed on my software? Where do we tackle the problem?
Right. Yeah, because we definitely go all the way from idea to implementation and maintenance afterwards. And there are a lot of the time in our cases, then we're working with the customer to create their own account in for Google Assistant, or account in Alexa developer account, or AWS or whatnot, and put stuff in their systems. So a lot of times they do have the team that will then monitor and stuff later, but there are going to be like modifications and things that they need to do, need our help to do. So
sure. I think one of the biggest things that I think I realized early on in developing is, as much as possible, I want to build systems that my clients can control themselves.
Yeah.
Because having them come to me every time they need to create a new account, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
Minor configuration changes come to me, it's kind of ridiculous. Major questions, can we do this? I've never done this before. Can the software do this? And I can say, oh, well, yeah. And here's how.
Yeah, let's explore that.
That now empowers them to do it themselves the next time.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, that's a good question. I can do it because I can fiddle with stuff inside. If this is going to be something that you do a lot, let's talk about making this under your control, not my control.
Yeah, let's figure out a way of config setting or UI or whatever we need to do to help solve that. How much documentation do you find yourself writing?
It varies a lot, since a lot of what I am generating needs to either be there are two types that I'll generally do. One is operational stuff for my coworkers.
Yeah.
So, how does this machine set up? How do we control things? What do we look for? And those are more on a general operational level. So as everyone in my group who knows the machines that we're working with, have a convenient place to look up how to deal with things, deal with issues.
Okay.
And in some level, even some basic troubleshooting stuff sometimes. We've seen this problem a bunch of times. If, they report this, here's how we need to handle it. And then there's stuff for the client, here's how you handle this task for yourself over and over again. So you don't have to, so you don't have to come to me. Here are the new features that we just added and how you use them. So that's most of what the documentation ends up being.
Do you find yourself doing any documentation for like a system architecture? Just like, these are the moving parts, these are the services that we're using, these are how things are connected. And
to some extent, that usually ends up being done as part of the design phase or part of the proposal and design phase. So when they say, here's what we need, we'll go in and say, well, this component, we'll set it up this way, and usually get their buy-off on the high-level version of that, and then there's a lower-level version of that where we'll specify, it's not just that we need to run this resource, it's that we need to run this resource and configure it this way, and we need to make sure we address this, and here are some of the other configuration points that we need to set up to make sure it works correctly, and here's why we want to avoid this tool because we've had bad experiences with it before. So we'll mostly iron that sort of stuff out as part of a detailed technical design, and then try to update that as we go and develop things.
Cool. Yeah, I think I do similar types of documentation that you do. So some of it is like, practical. This is how you configure things, but also sometimes it isn't earlier in the design phase. Sometimes it's more of, okay, this project has done, and if we want to make sure that somebody else on the team could jump in and make changes, then they need to have this is the stuff that you need to know before you jump into the code base, because it will make a lot more sense if you kind of understand the big picture of how things are working versus.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, we don't have, that's not as much done for us on the code level, probably should be, to be perfectly fair. We tend to do it more on the operational level than the code level.
Okay.
But we also have a smaller coding team than you do. How much testing do you do on a regular basis? Both in terms of setting up unit tests and code tests and the bigger integration testing?
It depends on the project, but we do set time aside for testing as part of the proposal that we do. With some clients, the requirement is that there are certain unit tests, like this project. That part of the reason why it's been so long and it's taken a big portion of last year and is going into this year is that there are certain things as far as code coverage requirements and running things through Fortify to check for vulnerabilities, or SonarQube that's checking for code smells, and there's just different things that it's a bigger company that we're doing it for, and so they're used to all those enterprise things that you'd have on a project. Whereas sometimes it's a small game, and the testing is testing that the game works, and it's not necessarily any unit testing along the way, but there's testing that we do internal. The team expanded that out to other people at Rain, expanding that out to then people that are at the client that we're working for before things get released, and we make sure that it's gone through enough paces, and we have fix any of the small fixes that we need to get that ready to release.
As much as I love the notion of test-driven development, I'm not as good a practitioner in it as I should be. But with that, one of the things I do tend to do a lot of is, some of the software I've written has a very, very long life.
Yeah.
Some of the projects I work on now started when I started at the company.
Oh, wow.
So they've changed a lot over the years. So it will often be that when I have a client say, when someone says either I need this to do something else, or this isn't working the way I thought it was supposed to, that's usually when I will introduce a test to say, okay, what is the current behavior? yeah, that doesn't work correctly. Let's go fix it. Here's the other, that's when I'll usually introduce a test to either make sure I don't accidentally break something, or I clearly identify what the problem is, and that way I can be sure I know when I fixed it.
Yeah.
So most of my tests are around problems.
Yeah. So I can definitely say on those. So test driven, I have nothing against test driven development. I just haven't necessarily got into the red green refactor. Understand it and wish I was better, I think, at that than I am. But definitely having a base of unit tests that are passing on a regular basis, that's green on a regular basis. And then when something breaks, it's just the thing that you just barely changed. And that's a lot easier for me to think through. I'm like, okay, well, why did this break that over there? Or like you say, when you hit something your client's using it and there's an error of some sort, and you're like, okay, how would I write a test that would expose this error? So I test it, write the test, it's red, I fix it, it's green, and I'm good to go. And so now I've got, because there have been times where I had to have gone through and do, medium-sized refactoring and changing things around or changing something. And it's good to be able to do a change, run the test, make sure they're still green, keep going. And as opposed to making the change and you think everything's good and then something else is wrong.
Right. And 4 days down the road, you finally get around to testing it and you discover somewhere it broke. And
now you're like trying to
which piece of my code in the past 4 days did that? Yeah.
Exactly.
It's okay. Any other tasks that you find yourself doing on a regular basis?
Other than that, just like one-on-ones with my manager, engineering team meetings. So one of the things I really do like about Rain is every week we have a all hands meeting. It's only 30 minutes, and we'll talk about projects that are spotlights on projects that other people are doing that that maybe that I'm not working on, or things that are in the pipeline, or other things that are going on with the company, or hey, let's get to know this new person that joined, put them on the hot seat, things like that. So I really like that. There's been companies I've worked for where I don't know what's going on it's kind of like do your job and don't worry about anything else. And I'm like, well, this whole thing affects me, right? And what can I do to make the company better as a whole? And if I don't know what that is, then it's kind of like looking, like just being able to see just right before, like a couple steps in front of your face. It's better to have that fog clearing and be able to get a bigger picture around you, what's going on.
Also, in agencies, our size, it's also just generally good to know what our coworkers are doing and going through. So if they've got a big release coming up, it's just good to know that they've got a big release coming up and they may be a little stressed. Even just knowing that can be, really a big help. Or, just generally get a sense of what else the company is doing. What other big projects are on people's plates, and knowing that and having an understanding of what sorts of things your company as a whole is doing can really be fulfilling in some ways and helpful.
Yep. Sometimes you get financial updates on things and you're like, oh, well, that's good. I like that.
I think the other big thing that I tend to do on a daily basis is I am, responding to and helping clients. So I don't think a day goes by when I don't have a client asking a question about how something works or is supposed to work or used to work, or hey, they suddenly discovered they haven't been getting this report for the past 2 years where they're supposed to be, or stuff along those lines. Just generally playing help desk. And that's good because it also keeps me in direct contact with my clients. And understanding what their needs are and how it changes over time.
Something I could do better is I need to reach out more, other than our regular engineering meetings, where all just the engineers get together and talk about what their projects are they're doing, or like some new technology, or asking questions. I need to do a better job reaching out and just kind of since it's remote, have that just personal connection and get to know them better. And
I have to say, one of the nice things about my company, and again, it helps that we're small, is that we do have a dedicated channel in Slack where we just are talking about what's going on. So that could be a coworker and talking about what some of their hobbies are, and they're just casually mentioning, here's what I did with this today, or mentioning what the weather is. I mean, it's almost a cliche sometimes, that all you're talking about is the weather. But sometimes that can actually be really interesting since we're all geographically dispersed to get a feel of what, each one is going through. Coworker recently bought a house. So, listening to them going through the whole, the search process, the buying process, and talking about moving into the new house has been interesting. But just generally keeping that connection is always a good thing.
Yeah. So I need to do more of that and be more active on like scheduling times to actually go do that, just to reach out. And even if it is like I say, 15 minutes is something that is easier to fit in if you're just wanting to do like a quick, hey, how you doing, and reconnecting.
So, I think it sounds like our days can sometimes be very much the same and sometimes be very, very different.
Yes, that's true. But it's fun. And that's part of the what I like about my job is that I'm always learning new things. And there's lots of variation, and I have plenty of opportunities to connect with people. Even though it's all remote, it's still good. I feel like I've got a good rapport with my teams and things. So I like it.
Yep, I definitely agree. So I hope folks find this interesting or enlightening. I certainly would love to hear other developers what your days are like. And that includes junior developers. One of the things I hope that junior developers are finding is that they are getting those connections with more senior developers, that they're getting that mentorship and guidance that is important.
And it may be scary, but if a junior developer were to reach out to me and say, hey, I would like to just have a regular meeting with you or something, I would make time. Because like somebody did that for me, and I was so appreciative.
As would I. Now, I'll admit, I'm probably not the person to talk to if you're looking for career advice, because it's not something I've had a lot of experience in. I've had 20 years in the same company. So I'm probably not the best to talk about career advice, but certainly talking about what broadening your technical horizons would look like, understanding how to grow within a field that you're interested in. I would certainly say, if you've got nobody else to reach out to, I'm certainly happy to talk about those sorts of things.
I think that the more communication that we can do, the better. I'm finding, my interactions on Twitter quite a bit more. Talking about topics that I wouldn't have talked about before, or that I didn't feel like you could talk about in a tech industry. That just kind of wasn't the way you did it things when I was going through. But hopefully we can find ourselves to a place where we can talk more about different things and feel more comfortable about asking those questions.
Agreed. So if folks feel like they want to or need to reach out to us, you can find us on Twitter, find us on LinkedIn. Leave comments down below on YouTube or on the podcast. And we are very, very happy to find time and to make time to talk with you about this industry.
And we'll catch you on the next episode of Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Have a good week, Mark.
Yeah, you too. Take care. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.